All right, buckle up for this deep dive. We're heading straight into a case that's got more twists and turns than a roller coaster. The Porco case,
Yeah, this one is a real head scratcher.
Del Mar, New York.
Mhm.
You picture like a quiet suburb, right? The kind of place where nothing really happens.
Picture perfect,
Ah.
white picket fences, the whole 9 yards.
But that peace was shattered in 2004 when a brutal attack left a family devastated. The Porcos, Peter, Joan, and their two sons, Jonathan and Christopher.
It's a case that grabbed headlines, and it just kept getting stranger the more you learned about it.
Right, we're going deep on this one. We've got court documents, police reports, and even a documentary called Memory of Murder, which focuses on Joan Porco and her memory after the attack. So a lot to unpack.
Yeah, memory plays a huge role in this whole thing. But before we get into all that, let's rewind back to November 15th, 2004, a seemingly ordinary Monday morning for the Porco family.
It starts like any other day, right? Peter Porco gets up, turns off the alarm,
Gets ready for work, it's just another day.
but then he starts to notice something's wrong. There's blood, and it's everywhere. In the bathroom, on the stairs, even outside on the porch.
A lot of blood, like a really disturbing amount.
Yeah, but here's the thing. Peter doesn't seem to realize that it's his blood. He just goes about his morning routine, like making his lunch, grabbing the newspaper. It's almost as if nothing is wrong.
Right, and this is where things get really bizarre, because you would think with that much blood, you'd know something seriously wrong.
Exactly. And it wasn't until Peter collapsed at the foot of the stairs that the severity of his injuries became clear. He'd suffered a massive head trauma during the attack.
Specifically to the part of the brain that controls like higher level thinking and awareness.
So while he could still perform those basic tasks, almost like on autopilot, he couldn't grasp the danger he was in. Tragically, Peter never regained consciousness.
It's really sad because in a way, his brain was working against him.
Absolutely. And it was actually Peter's coworker, Michael, who found him. He got worried when Peter didn't show up for work. And that's when the true horror of what had happened came to light.
Because upstairs, Joan Porco was discovered in a pool of blood. She'd been brutally attacked with an axe, multiple blows to the head and face.
It's hard to even imagine that scene. The axe, the blood, the sheer brutality. It seemed like a crime of passion, an outburst of rage.
Yeah, it had that feel to it, right? But there were also these elements that seemed staged, almost like someone was trying to make it look like a burglary.
Like the phone line had been cut and the security system was smashed. It's like they'd seen this in a movie and were trying to copy it.
Exactly. And this wasn't even the first time the Porco house had been targeted. A couple of years earlier, there'd been a break-in where laptops were stolen.
Oh, really? So there was already a history there.
Right. And the detective who handled both cases, Detective Chris Bowish, he started to see a pattern. In both instances, the intruders seemed to have come in through the garage window, even cutting the mesh screen in a specific way, like a semicircle.
Okay, so that's pretty specific. Did they find any evidence to support that this time around?
Well, that's where things get interesting, because that garage window, it had been bolted shut since that first break-in, and it was covered in cobwebs.
So no way someone got in that way, which means
Which means someone was trying to make it look like a repeat offense, like a copycat.
a red herring.
Mm-mm.
Classic misdirection. So if it wasn't a random burglary, what were the other leads the police were looking into? I remember reading about Peter Porco receiving a death threat years earlier, back when he was working as a judge.
Yeah, that was definitely on their radar. Could this be some kind of delayed revenge?
And then there were those rumors about connections to organized crime. Peter's great uncle, Frank the fireman Porco, had some ties to the mob, right?
Right. So maybe this was a hit ordered by someone with a grudge?
It's like every possible angle had a twist, right? What happened with those leads?
Well, the guy who made that death threat, turns out he had a rock-solid alibi. And the whole fireman's axe theory went up in smoke when the weapon they found was just an ordinary axe from the Porco's garage.
Okay, so not the mob then. What about that letter that was sent to the Times-Union? The one claiming responsibility for Peter's death.
Oh yeah, the one with the white powder scare. Talk about trying to throw a wrench in the works.
That's got to be a stressful day at the newspaper office.
Definitely. But the police quickly figured out it was a hoax, which might seem strange considering they were looking at all these other possibilities. But there's a reason they dismissed that letter so quickly.
Because they already had their sights set on somewhere.
Exactly. Someone much closer to home. You see, Joan Porco, in those agonizing moments before slipping into a coma, she identified her attacker.
Wait, are you saying don't tell me?
She pointed the finger at her own son, Christopher.
Joan Porco accused her own son? I mean, wow, you really can't get much closer to home than that.
No, you can't. And it completely changes how you see the whole case. But to understand why that accusation was so shocking, we need to back up a bit and talk about Christopher.
Yeah, because when you hear attacker, you might picture a certain type of person. But Christopher didn't fit that mold at all. He was like the all-American kid. Good grades, popular, charming, close with his family.
He seemed to have it all, the golden boy. So when word got out that he was the main suspect, people were like, no way, there's no way that's possible.
I can see why people would be skeptical. So what happened? What did the investigators uncover that started to change their minds?
Well, they dug a little deeper, and that picture-perfect image of Christopher, it kind of started to crumble. They found a lot of lies, a hidden side to him that didn't match up with that golden boy persona.
Okay, so there was more to him than met the eye, and I'm guessing they also found a motive, right? Something that pointed to Christopher.
Oh, yeah, definitely. But let's start with his alibi. Christopher claimed that on the night of the attack, he was asleep in his dorm common room at the University of Rochester. Sounded pretty straightforward.
Until it wasn't.
Exactly. Because his classmates, they came forward and told the police that they were in that common room pretty late, like into the early morning hours, and Christopher wasn't there. And it's not like it was a huge space where he could have easily been missed.
So right off the bat, his alibi falls apart. And I remember reading about a yellow Jeep Wrangler that became really important in the case.
That Jeep was key. See, it wasn't just any Jeep, it was Christopher's. And the police, they used toll records, witness accounts, even security footage to track the movements of a yellow Jeep Wrangler that matched his. And guess what? It was traveling from Rochester to Del Mar and back at the exact same time the attacks happened.
So they could literally trace his movements back and forth.
Pretty much. And remember those details we talked about earlier, the ones that seemed kind of random, like the way the intruder cut the screen, the shape?
Yeah, I remember.
Well, those seemingly insignificant details ended up being huge in this case, especially with the Jeep. Witnesses remembered a barcode sticker on the Jeep's window and another sticker on the spare tire cover, oval-shaped. And guess what? Christopher's Jeep had those exact same stickers.
Talk about bad luck.
Yes, it's like he was practically leaving a trail of breadcrumbs, and it gets even crazier. Remember how the killer avoided using the electronic Easy Pass system for the tolls and paid with cash instead? Well, when they searched Christopher's Jeep, guess what they found on the floor? His missing Easy Pass transponder.
It's almost like he wanted to get caught. Did they find anything else in the Jeep?
Oh, yeah. Remember those toll tickets he paid for with cash? Well, one of them had his mitochondrial DNA on it.
Mitochondrial DNA. I have to admit, I'm not really sure what that is or how it works.
It's pretty interesting, actually. Unlike regular DNA, the kind that comes from both your parents, mitochondrial DNA, it only comes from your mother. So it doesn't pinpoint Christopher specifically, but it links it back to anyone on his mom's side of the family.
Okay, that makes sense. So that's already a lot of evidence pointing at Christopher. But there was even more, right? What about the security system at the Porco house?
Another big piece of the puzzle. The system was disarmed using the master code, a code that Christopher knew. And on top of that, they found his fingerprint on the basement door, the door where they had locked the family dog during the attack.
So it's all circumstantial evidence, but it's all adding up. And then there's Joan, who first identified Christopher, but then completely changed her story after waking up. What happened there?
That's one of the biggest mysteries in this whole case. Joan survived that attack, but she suffered severe memory loss because of her injuries.
And that memory loss completely changed her perspective.
Yeah.
It's almost like she became a different person. She went from accusing her son to defending him.
Completely. She was adamant that Christopher would never hurt her or his dad. She even begged the police to leave him alone, to look somewhere else for the real attacker.
It's hard to wrap your head around that. Your own son is the prime suspect in this horrific attack against you, and you're protecting him.
It definitely makes you question what was going on in her mind. Was it really just memory loss? Did those injuries somehow change her perception of what happened? Was she pressured or manipulated into changing her story? Or was she deliberately choosing to be loyal to her son, even if it meant protecting him from facing justice?
I mean, those are some heavy questions, and I bet they're still being debated today.
Oh, absolutely. But there's another layer to this whole thing that we haven't even touched on yet, and that's Christopher's double life. All those stories he told about being rich, successful, even owning a mansion in North Carolina.
Hold on. Are you telling me he made all that up?
Yep. Every bit of it. He spun these elaborate tales to his friends, showering them with expensive gifts, all to keep up this facade of wealth and success. But it was all a lie.
What was the point of all that? Why go to such lengths to create a fake life?
It seems like he had this deep need for validation, like he wanted to be seen as someone he wasn't.
It's sad in a way, but it sounds like those lies were connected to something a lot more serious than just wanting to impress his friends. I remember reading about some financial troubles he was having.
Oh, yeah, it wasn't just harmless exaggeration. Those lies were actually covering up a mountain of debt and a really strained relationship with his father.
So the truth eventually came out.
It always does, right? He had overdrawn bank accounts, forged documents, even taken out loans using his dad's name. It was like a ticking time bomb.
And I'm guessing Peter wasn't too happy about that.
Understatement of the year. When Peter confronted Christopher about all the lies and the debt, things got really heated.
Uh-oh. This can't be good.
Nope. Peter demanded that Christopher take responsibility for his actions. He even threatened to cut him off financially and warned him about the damage he was doing to their credit.
So it was like a pressure cooker about to explode.
And unfortunately, on that November morning, it did.
So we've got this brutal attack, a son accused by his own mother, a web of lies, and a possible motive that all comes down to money. Sounds like the prosecution had a pretty strong case.
Yeah, they did. They had a lot to work with. The circumstantial evidence, financial records, witness testimonies. But it wasn't as straightforward as you might think.
Because of Joan. Her defending Christopher, I imagine that must have thrown a wrench in things for the prosecution.
Big time. You've got the victim's mother refusing to cooperate, insisting that her son could never do such a thing. That's a huge obstacle to overcome.
Yeah, it's like something out of a movie. How did they even handle that?
Well, they focused on Joan's initial identification of Christopher, the one she made right after the attack. They argued that that was the most reliable account because it was, fresh, untainted by time or outside influence.
But wouldn't the defense just argue that she was in shock, confused? That her injuries might have affected her judgment?
Oh, they absolutely did. They basically said that her initial identification was unreliable, possibly influenced by her state of mind and all the chaos.
And she couldn't remember the attack itself, right? Did that help the defense's case?
For sure. They used that memory loss to their advantage, saying that her recollection of events couldn't be trusted, so it shouldn't be used against Christopher.
What about the way Detective Bowish questioned Joan at the hospital? Didn't the defense bring that up too?
Yeah, they argued that the way Bowish questioned Joan right after the attack was improper, that her mental state should have been assessed first, before any formal questioning.
So they were trying to discredit that first identification. Did it work?
It definitely raised some doubts. But the prosecution, they had other witnesses who backed up Bowish's account. Paramedics who were in the room, they confirmed that Joan did identify Christopher.
So it was back and forth, back
Yep.
and forth. What about that shadowy figure Joan remembered seeing in the driveway weeks before? Did the defense use that?
They did. They suggested that this unknown person, this shadowy figure, could be the real attacker and that the police hadn't looked into that lead properly.
Classic defense tactic, right? Shifting the focus, creating reasonable doubt, pointing the finger somewhere else. But the prosecution, they had a lot of evidence, right? All those toll records, the witnesses who saw Christopher's Jeep, the fingerprint, the security system.
Yeah, they had a lot. And then came a big turning point in the trial. Jonathan, Peter and Joan's older son, he took the stand. Can you imagine having to testify against your own brother in a murder trial?
It's hard to even comprehend. What did he say?
Well, he didn't outright accuse Christopher, but he did talk about their strained relationship and how Christopher was in a lot of debt, under a lot of financial pressure.
So he supported that motive, the money angle.
Yeah.
What about the life insurance policies? Did he mention those?
Yeah, he confirmed that both he and Christopher stood to inherit a lot of money if their parents died.
Man, what a mess. This family was just torn apart by all of this.
Absolutely. And then they showed the crime scene photos. They had to show them in black and white because the color photos were too graphic.
I read about that. They were so disturbing that even experienced investigators were shaken by them.
Now imagine the impact those images had on the jury. Seeing the brutality of the attack, the extent of Joan's injuries, it would be hard to forget.
After all that evidence, the emotional testimony, what did the jury decide?
They found Christopher Porco guilty. Guilty of second-degree murder for killing his father and attempted murder for the attack on his mother. He got 50 years to life.
Wow. This case really shows that things aren't always what they seem. You think of a peaceful suburb like Del Mar, and you don't expect something this dark to happen.
You never know what's going on behind closed doors, right? And to make things even more complicated, Joan Porco, to this day, she believes Christopher is innocent. She visits him in prison, even helps fund his appeals.
It's hard to understand. After everything, the trial, the guilty verdict, she still stands by him. Makes you wonder.
It does. The whole case is just fascinating. Memory, family loyalty, and the limits of what we're capable of doing for the people we love. It makes you think about how our brains deal with trauma, how we cope with the unimaginable.
It's definitely a case that sticks with you. Makes you think, what would I do in that situation? How would I handle something so horrific?
That's the thing about these kinds of stories. It's not just true crime, it's a reflection of what it means to be human. And even with all the evidence in the world, there are always questions left unanswered, doubts that linger.
Yeah, it's a deep dive that leaves you asking, what if? And that's what makes a story truly unforgettable.